Hey guys, my name is Jennifer Brave. I am the founder and owner of Facets Relational Care, and today I'm going to be talking about spiritual abuse. I'm going to talk about spiritual abuse today because, as with all of the other types of abuse that I've covered, for the most part, it's not something that you hear discussed a lot, especially not in the collective, because spiritual abuse is something that is more likely to be talked about in religious communities or amongst religious people. Also, spiritual abuse to date doesn't have an exact definition. So what I'm going to do today is talk about all of the different types of abuse that could fall underneath of the heading of spiritual abuse. For example, making fun of someone's religious beliefs or their spirituality, their practices, specifically with the intent to imply or directly state that your religious perspectives or your spiritual practices are superior to theirs. Another example, preventing someone from practicing their religion. As long as someone's religious practices aren't hurting anybody else, they have the right to practice their religion. To refuse them that right is a form of spiritual abuse. Another example, using someone's spiritual beliefs to manipulate them. This one is actually much more common than you'd think. I'll give you a random example, probably not a very good one, from the perspective of the Christian faith because it's what I grew up with and it's what I know. You have two people that are married, one person works 7 days a week, and the other person is bitter and angry and lonely because they want to spend more time with this person, and they can't because they work all the time. So this partner that's feeling very bitter may say, well, the Bible says that you have to honor the Sabbath and you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath, and you've been working every Sunday for the past 6 months. This is a sin. You can't do this. You need to stay home and spend time with me. So that would be one example of taking somebody's religious beliefs and trying to use those beliefs to manipulate them to behave in a way that you would like them to behave. In situations where you have two people that are raising children, trying to spiritually manipulate the children to believe a specific thing that you want them to believe, and disregarding their right as individuals, even as children, to make their own religious and spiritual choices, and taking the option away from them to learn or be exposed to other religious cultures. This is a form of spiritual abuse. In the divorce process, as I was going through it, it didn't really play out, but one of the things that my ex-husband was very adamant about, especially since I had left the Christian faith, was he wanted to have full custody of our daughter because he was scared that I was going to expose her to my agnostic philosophies. And it was very, very important to him that she grow up Christian. I mean, to be entirely honest, tying in with the last point, given the fact that he has narcissistic personality disorder, having her so heavily indoctrinated in the Christian religion is to his benefit because he already knows the Bible, he knows the culture of the church. If he can get her to buy into that without questioning it or without having any external knowledge to compare it to, he's got the ability to abuse her and to manipulate her and to shame her into behaving and being the person that he wants her to be, the version of her that he wants her to be, which in and of itself is a form of abuse. Another example, selecting specific pieces from a religious text and using those to justify your abusing another person. My ex-husband is a professional at this. So in the process of getting a divorce, I had a year earlier had come out to him and told him that I had had an affair and that I ended it and I was sorry and I wanted us to work on our marriage, et cetera, et cetera. And granted, it took some time to get through that, but we did get through that, and we got to a place where I thought he had forgiven me, but good old narcissistic personality disorder, they will keep a list of every fucking thing you do. And they will pull it out when it is convenient for them to continually shame you and make you feel like a piece of shit because they believe that that is their mechanism of control over you. And it is if you allow it to be. In this case, he had a spiritual aspect that he could use with it. The second I filed for a divorce, and when I would tell him to stop abusing me, or I would say, this is abuse, I'm not allowing you to do this to me, he would say, well, what do you expect? You cheated on me, which had nothing to do with anything. And I would say that. And he would say, well, in the Bible, God says that you can't have an affair. You remember what happens in the New Testament to the woman that they found committing adultery and they drug her out into the middle of the street to stone her. To which I replied, yeah, I do remember that story. And actually, if you're so gung-ho on, living to the letter of this Bible of yours, you will also remember that at that time, Jesus said to these people, if, the person that has no sin can throw the first stone on her. And nobody could throw a stone because every one of those motherfuckers had done some shit too. And then he saves this lady and says, don't do it again, basically. He had conveniently forgotten that part of scripture, and when I argued that point, he just wouldn't say anything. If it was a text message, I wouldn't get a text back. If it was to his face, he'd just kind of stare off for a minute and change the subject. It was amazing the way that he could twist some sort of logic into how that last part of the story didn't apply in this case because he was really hurt by what I did. Another example of that I experienced in my marriage, in the Christian faith, in the New Testament, it states that when a man and woman get married, they are to submit their bodies to each other. So the woman has to give her body to the husband has to give his body to the wife. And by the way, I disagree with that you don't have to give your body to anybody. But the way that that's interpreted in a lot of Christian circles, is you have to have sex with your spouse. You can't withhold sex. You can withhold sex whenever you want to, it's your body. I mean, you're probably gonna get a divorce, or your spouse may cheat on you. I mean, you have to understand that there's probably going to be consequences for that. But at the end of the day, it's your body. You don't have to have sex with anybody that you don't want to have sex with. So in my situation, my husband and I at one point hadn't had sex in a year, maybe a little bit more than a year. And he used that as justification for raping me. So this is called marital rape. And the spiritual perspective behind his justification was, in the Bible it says that you are not allowed to keep your body from me. Therefore, my rape is justified because when we get married, your body is my body, it's my property, I own it. Another example of using religious texts to abuse other people would be to abuse perhaps somebody who was homosexual. Shaming people that are homosexual, trying to convert them to be heterosexual, sending children to summer camps that promise to take children with homosexual tendencies and send them back home heterosexual, disrespecting a person's right to their sexuality and their sexual practices, using the logic that in the Bible, God says, homosexuality is an abomination. By the way, I've seen the same thing done with divorce. You can't get a divorce. You have to go to marriage counseling. You have to figure out how to make this work. You have to be miserable with this person for the rest of your life because God hates divorce. Another example, threatening to punish someone if they don't believe what you want them to believe. This is another thing that I experienced with my husband. Prior to filing for the divorce, I had told him that I'd left the Christian faith and had adopted an agnostic philosophy. And he told me, you have 100 days to decide to be a Christian again, or I'm going to divorce you. That is spiritual abuse. He has absolutely no right to dictate what my spiritual or religious beliefs are. I'll put it to you a different way. Basically what he said was, you need to believe what I want you to believe, or I'm going to punish you by removing my relationship from you. That's a form of abuse. An appropriate response from my husband in that situation could have been, I understand that you've changed your beliefs. that's going to be a problem for me personally because I don't feel comfortable being married to someone that has a different set of religious beliefs than I do, and that's entirely fine. For a lot of people, religion and spirituality are a deal breaker for relationships. And to be fair, if you're in a relationship with someone that shares the same religious beliefs and perspectives that you do, the relationships are a lot easier. They get complicated when you have two people that have different perspectives, and extra complicated when you have children, because then you have to try to figure out how are you going to spiritually guide your children as they grow. So I get it. He's entitled to not want to be married to someone that has a different religious perspective. But again, the appropriate response could have been, this is not something that I'm comfortable with. I don't feel like I can live with this. I would like a divorce. I need to think about this because I don't know if I can live with this. Something along those lines. But to make a demand that I change my perspective and my beliefs to make him comfortable or else, that's a form of abuse. That's absolutely not okay. Another example of spiritual abuse, forcing your religion or your spiritual perspectives on someone after they have explicitly stated that they are not interested in receiving or hearing them. Most unfortunately, this is something that is so very common within the Christian faith. Once I left the faith, especially once I filed for a divorce, this is something that would frequently happen to me. All of my friends and my family and the people that we went to church with became very, very concerned that I wasn't a Christian anymore because I was going to go to hell. And I filed for a divorce 3 months after I had, come out of the religious closet, so to speak. And so in their mind, she turned her back on God. She's getting a divorce. We love her so much, we need to go and save her and bring her back to Jesus. That's a form of abuse because I had already strictly stated this is no longer something that I believe. After I state that, regardless of whether or not you can understand it or you like it, you need to respect my beliefs and leave it alone. I'll give you another example of forcing a religious perspective on somebody after they have explicitly said that they're not interested. Although this one is a more complicated and complex example. This is another way that my ex-husband abused me as we were going through the divorce. Knowing that I had adopted an agnostic philosophy and that the Bible did not hold any more emotional value for me, he would abuse me. And when I was having a bad day or when he really got to me with his abuse, he would send me Bible verses as forms of encouragement, deliberately disrespecting my faith choices and using the faith that means nothing to me anymore to comfort me after he abused me. That's some fucked up shit. My last example that I'm going to use today for what spiritual abuse could look like is telling somebody what they do and don't believe. My ex-husband never did this to me directly. However, I'm interested to know what's going on with him and my daughter when they're together because my 4-year-old daughter knows that I'm not a Christian and will tell me, "Mommy, you are a Christian." And I'll say, "No, I'm not." And she'll tell me, "Daddy says you are." And I'll say, "Daddy's wrong, I'm not." And she'll say, "Yes, you are." And she'll get really adamant about it. And I'll say, "No, I'm not." And she'll say, "You have to be." And I'll say, "No, I don't." And she is already being trained to tell other people what they do and do not believe. By the way, that's a form of gaslighting, which is also a very common manipulative abuse tactic that's found with people with narcissistic personality disorder. Those are just a few examples of what spiritual abuse could look like. Spiritual abuse is not limited to just those things. So to sum up, because it doesn't have an exact definition, the way that I would define spiritual abuse is any instance where someone uses your faith and or spiritual practices against you, to hurt you, to manipulate you, to coerce you, to make you feel like you are less than, or to violate boundaries that they should not violate. For example, the rape. As with any other type of abuse, spiritual abuse can be found anywhere. It's not limited to the walls of a church. People that could possibly be spiritual abusers could be teachers, educators, comedians, friends, family members such as a spouse, parents, siblings, in-laws, children, complete strangers. Of course, people in the church, pastors, spiritual leaders, missionaries, counselors, and therapists. All of these people can be spiritual abusers. Spirituality, faith, whether you're a religious person or not, this is true even for someone that might identify as an atheist, or for me as an agnostic person. Your faith, the way that you answer the really big questions, like what's real? Why is there suffering? Do we have a purpose? Where did all of this come from? Where am I going to go after I die, if anywhere? Who am I? Faith and religion and spiritual practices are what people rely on, knowingly or unknowingly, to answer those questions. So, from my observation, when someone is spiritually abused, the foundation of what it means to be human is what's being broken and manipulated. This is important because when that foundation is broken and manipulated, all of the other aspects of humanity, like our psychology, our emotional state, our behavior, kind of crumble in on top of that. It's not to say that that couldn't be the case with sexual abuse, with rape, with physical abuse, or any other form of abuse that you want to talk about. That could be the case. But spiritual abuse, I have found, tends to directly just go straight for the identity, straight for the sense of humanity. And one of the immediate results from spiritual abuse can be confusion about who you are, what's real, what's not real, what can you count on, what can you not count on, and I mean like big picture count on, like is there any greater good out there? Is there any sort of spiritual, deity that's taking care of me? Is all of this an accident? It can induce a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of hatred. It's a very serious form of abuse because it hits people at the core of what it means to be human. Identity, purpose. What the hell is all this shit? I look back on my years as a Christian, the well-intentioned but ignorant and misguided and unknowingly arrogant attempts that I made to try to give the gift of Jesus to people. By give, I mean, solicit without having been asked to solicit, and things of that nature. I hope that that hasn't done any long-term damage to any of the people that had to interact with me in that way. It's something that's in my mind a lot now, as I've been on the receiving end of it, and I can see how hurtful it is. And I got some vicious versions of spiritual abuse, and one of the things that I find interesting about my divorce in general is, and really even my marriage, is if we take all of the different kinds of abuse that I've been exposed to, honestly, I think the spiritual abuse was the most traumatic, or at least one of the top two most traumatic. It's one of two things that I'm still trying to work through. I still have a lot of bitterness and hurt and anger towards. And I'm trying to handle that as best as I can. But I'm thankful for the opportunity to see from this new perspective. And I'm trying to incorporate this new perspective into how I interact now with other people from an agnostic standpoint, so that I don't continue that cycle of abuse and disrespect and boundary violation. So, other than that, that is what I have to say about spiritual abuse.